Good morning. This is Bill from Curious Cars on a miserable, muggy, shitty, horrible Florida morning. I mean, it just rained. It's, it's too much. I don't even know. I think it's still August, and none of it really matters. I stopped checking the weather a month or so ago because it's just going to say it's going to be hot and humid and awful, and it is, and it's been that, and it's not getting any better, and the hell with it. So I'm just going to move on from the weather and stop even thinking about it. I haven't done a video in a couple of weeks, which I apologize for. I had an impromptu trip to the Keys, which was absolutely lovely. I didn't know it was coming. It came on sort of by accident. And ended up going down there, staying in a little place, getting some lobster. You know, the Keys weather in Florida is pretty good because you've got this little strip of land between the Gulf and the Atlantic, so you get all kinds of ocean breezes, and even if it's a little bit hot in the middle of the day, the nights are much, much nicer than they are here in swampland Naples, and it was good. So I'm back now, and things are going fine. I've got a few cars to do, and then I'm leaving again a week from Friday. I'm going on a little trip to a cabin in the mountains. I'm gonna go by myself up there. I'm taking an AR-10 with me and a couple hundred rounds of ammo, and I have no plans to either turn on my phone or let anyone within rifle range, so that should be a great fun trip. Can't wait for that. But before it happens, I'm gonna try to get a couple of cars knocked out. And this morning, what else? I'll give you a couple more updates. Okay, the flasks were shipped. They were shipped before I left for the Keys over a week ago, so anybody who won a flask has already got one. They've already, in international, maybe a delay, but I doubt it. I think it's been long enough now that the flasks have been delivered, so thank you for that. What else can I tell you? Well, we've got another one coming up. Anyone who entered for the flasks is going to be automatically entered in the next thing, which I'll get into as we go with this. What else can I tell you? Not much. Look, okay, there's some more change. I know this has been a epic sort of month or two of changes, and more are coming. You know, we've talked about the motorhome thing. That is still happening. You know, unlike channels that have their shit together, you know, they announce something and then it's done within a few days. Well, that is not the way this channel operates. So, you know, yeah, I'm going to do the motorhome travel thing, but it's going to take me a while to get it together. I literally have not even started the motorhome since I did that video on it a few weeks ago. I still have to bring it to the tire store. I've got a few more mods to do before I take a trip, but that is definitely coming. I'm also going to release a video on the cars that I want to do videos on, so if any of you out there have them, you know, there's going to be an email where you can send it in and we can put it together, and hopefully I can do a review on them. You know, it's just you know, it's just the future. I'm leaving Auto House of Naples. You know, it's sold again to new owners. That's not like the 18th time I've been sold like a lawn chair, and I've just had my fill of it. So, you know, mutually with the new owners and myself, I still have a relationship with them. I'm still going to run a few cars through there, but I've moved my office. I'm going in with a friend of mine into a new little dealership down the street. I'll get into that in a future video, but essentially my very long-term relationship with them is over. And here I am in Peter's driveway, speaking of Auto House. You can see he came back from his trip because the grass is now mowed and even edged, so everything looks a lot better. Still no goats, and we'll see if he gets those back, but the motorhome is back, and yeah, in a way, things feel kind of back to normal. So anyway, things are moving on, and we're going to keep going. I had some coronavirus whiskey this morning, absolutely essential to keeping, you know, monkeypox, Russians, you know, whatever it is, the whiskey just seems to be working. So I'm going to stick with that. It's one of the few things in my life that actually is working. So why mess with a good thing? And that's going to lead us directly into this car, which is a 1982 Citroen 2CV Charleston. This is straight out of Peter's collection. He was kind enough to let me, I was looking around for a car to do. I had a few, none of them excited me. I don't know if a French car is going to excite you guys, but I thought, the hell with it. I mean, this is a true curious car. I haven't done one in years, at least not in a true review video format, and I wanted to get that out of the way. So here it is, and we're going to jump right into it. Firstly, the name Citroen with 2 dots over the E. It would have been a perfect name for an 80s heavy metal band with, the kind with big hair and makeup. They actually looked unnervingly sexy in their album covers. It was kind of strange, but, those 2 dots definitely had a little bit of a heavy metal twang to them. Secondly, you've got deux chevaux, which translates directly into 2 horses, which refers to the taxable horsepower of the car, and leave it to the Europeans to work, taxation into a car name. And this car is as iconic as any other ever made. I mean, you want to talk about 57 Chevys or Beetles or 300 SL Gullwings, they don't have anything on the deux chevaux. It's just as much as them. And it's synonymous with France. It's as synonymous as, like the Eiffel Tower or Edith Piaf or Escargot and Napoleon. It's as French as Brie or Baguettes or Berets or Brigitte Bardot or Bastille or Breton shirts and bonbons. I mean, it's just absolutely as French as it gets. It's got a lot of nicknames. It's one of the more nicknamed cars in history. Probably the most famous one is the Duck, they call it. Also the Ugly Duckling. It was also known as the Tin Snail. Some people called it the Dolly, although that was an edition of it. And it's just one of those cars that, has worked its way into the fabric of pop culture, and it remains there today. And it really, looking at it, it takes me back to being a kid. My dad was in the travel business. God rest his soul. He was a hell of a guy. But he specialized in affordable European tours, which meant that every summer, basically, I was jetted off to Europe with my mother on a 747 or L1011 to stake out some 3-star hotel or attraction. And those journeys had a big impact on me as a kid. Europe, to a kid from Naples, Florida, in the time, in the 80s, the early 80s and mid 80s, it seemed so utterly different. The buildings were strange and ancient. The road signs were weird. The food was kind of unusual. You asked for ketchup, and you got some weird shit that didn't at all seem like ketchup, and sauces, and the sirens on the emergency vehicles sounded bizarre, and the money looked fake, and, ice. You asked for ice, and you'd think you'd asked for a kidney or something. And the people just did not dress like they did in Florida. But mostly, I was fascinated by all the cars that we didn't have in America that were running around, cars I'd never seen before. Even the dramatic differences between those we did. Like, you'd see a Mercedes with yellow headlights, or tiny bumpers. And it was absolutely fascinating to me as a kid. Had a big impact and probably resounded well into today in the stuff that I like or am interested in. But none of the cars seem more odd or strange to me than the ones in France. Renault, Citroen, Peugeot, they all sold cars in the U.S., but pretty much none of them really took off. My dad, again, he was in the travel business. He was trying to look the part. He bought a Citroen DS21 in Chicago in the 60s. It was before my time, but I saw the photos. But apparently that thing just turned to powder after a couple of salty winters, and he traded it in on a Maverick or something. But other than, in my lifetime, the Renault Alliance of the 1980s, that one was a little bit prolific for a French car. But other than that, man, you saw a French car on the streets here. It was like seeing a UFO. I mean, for one, it called into question the citizenship of, whoever owned one, not to mention some other things. But it just was not a sight that you saw very often. And it didn't help that French cars looked so utterly bizarre. I think it was Jeremy Clarkson of Top Gear who said that the French build cars like people who were told about cars. Somebody had explained to them what cars were, but none of them had ever actually seen one in the flesh before they started building them. And I think that holds true, particularly for Citroens, particularly for earlier Citroens. You know, I absolutely loved the traction Avance, if you remember those things. It looked like something out of Spy versus Spy, and actually preceded this car, but you know, if I could get my hands on one of those, well, we'll do that in the future. But the bizarreness of the French car particularly holds true for this, the 2CV. You know, it looks a bit jaunty and irreverent, you know, like something somebody designed on a whim for fun. They put it together, they didn't put a lot of thought into it, you know, it was just a thing. But that really couldn't be further from the truth. You know, to call it, I mean, a ton of thought and engineering went into these cars. We'll just start with that. I mean, more than you could possibly imagine. It was a huge deal when it came out, and it was something that had been really planned out and thought out beyond description. It was a very, very big deal in France. And to call it the French Volkswagen Beetle, you know, it has some truth to it, but it isn't entirely accurate, because even though they basically shared the same path to fruition, if you will, they were both designed in the 30s. They both had a purpose. They were both basically going to be the people's car. But the Beetle was designed to take advantage of the 1930s Germany's new autobahns, you know, these big highways that were being built. And they were going to transport Nazi families to, you know, in relative comfort and efficiency to their Aryan-themed vacations, where they would wear, you know, swimsuits that were too small. They'd eat schnitzel and sausage and seek high on each other to the sounds of Wagner. That was not the case with these cars. The 2CV, this one, was built for basically a country that had no roads. I mean, France of the 1930s was very, very rural, and I think they had put most of their infrastructure money into sort of rebuilding chateaus and restoring artwork and, you know, putting together the Maginot Line. So, you know, they didn't have big highways. The vice president of Citroen at the time, who had come from Michelin, a guy named Pierre Boulanger, he challenged his team to come up with what he called an umbrella on wheels, which would be a minimalist car that was cheap to buy and so stupidly simple it could be easily repaired, maintained on a shoestring budget, even by a dirt-poor farmer. I mean, it was just absolutely a different vibe altogether from what the Beetle was. Well, the Beetle was supposed to be cheap and easy to maintain, but it didn't have the same vibe. And what this was meant to do was, I think the design parameters were to carry 4 people, or, you know, 3 or 2 people and 100 pounds of potatoes at 40 miles an hour while getting about 60 miles to the gallon. And it should be able to traverse rugged terrains and freshly plowed fields, carrying a basket of eggs without breaking them. And the looks of the car would be more or less irrelevant, as you can plainly see. And the result of that was the TPV. So they actually did it. They actually met the parameters that this guy put out, and they came out with what was called the tout petite voiture. Give my French. Very small car, which was a rudimentary aluminum-bodied thing. It actually had hammock seats with supports hanging off the ceiling. I mean, if that's not the most French thing I can imagine. And it only had one headlamp, because that's all that was required in France at the time. And it was a marvel of engineering. You know, it was meant to debut at the 39 Paris Auto Show, but before that could happen, in fact, just like a month before, France declared war on Germany. The show was canceled, and everything went to absolute shit. So the project was scrapped. Boulanger hid the prototypes because he didn't want them being, you know, the way the Volkswagens became like Kubel wagons and, you know, all these weird little things that the Germans used to transport Nazi generals around. He didn't want that to happen to his 2CV. So he hid them in barns barns. He, the Nazis were looking for the tooling for the cars. He mislabeled those and train cars, sent them to all corners of France, put these things under haystacks and barns. He hid them so well, in fact, that two of them were only found in 1994. They weren't known to exist. And, for his troubles, he was named an enemy of the Reich, and, they were going to deport him to Germany, keep a close eye on him, and, whatever. Didn't work out. He stayed around France and died years later. But basically, the 2CV was hidden. And like the Beetle, it only came to fruition after the war. It wasn't, what should have been released in 1939 or 1940 finally got released in 1948. And that was this car. And of course, some modifications had happened. Aluminum was no longer a thing that could be found after all the war machine stuff. So the car had become stamped steel with, corrugation to make it strong enough. They had a water-cooled engine to begin with. That became an air-cooled engine when the 2CV was finally released. And there were a few other little differences, but otherwise it was basically the same design as the TPV. And no longer, unfortunately, were the seats suspended by strings from the ceiling. They were actually bolted to the floor. And the critics were unimpressed off the bat. They had no... It was really ridiculous, simplistic to a fault. Just not at all what they had in mind as a car. The buying public completely disagreed. They loved it. They went nuts for it. They all wanted one. Before you knew it, there was a 5-year waiting list for these things. It just absolutely hit the heart of particularly what the rural French guy wanted, and they just couldn't get enough of them. So the popularity of it was epic. In fact, it was the first car to reach 1 million units sold. It beat the Beetle to that. And you don't think of that. You just think of the Beetle as this sort of thing that took the world by storm. Well, the 2CV actually was ahead of them on that front. And they built these things for 40 years, from 1948 to 1988. It was called the Citroen A platform. There were a bunch of variants of them, and between this 2CV and all of its variants, there were almost 9 million of these cars sold. So it really became an absolute tour de force, if you will, in the automotive world, and it still remains today. And it ends up, even though it ended in '88, it still has an incredibly strong cult following of really strange people that you probably wouldn't have to sit next to on an airplane. So you don't want that. But still very, very impressive. So I tell you what, I'm going to pause for a minute there. I'll get more into the car, and then we'll keep going. So hold on one moment. All right, so let's just jump right into this thing. So essentially, the car had a box frame, very simplistic. It had probably the most famous part of the car is the suspension. It had what was essentially a very modern suspension for the time. It was all, trailing arms and torsion bars and that sort of thing, which, truly didn't come out till much later on most other mainstream cars. Again, it used a very simplistic engine. And you could say the looks were relevant, but I mean, look at this thing. I mean, it's just absolutely bizarre. It has, fender skirts made of tin. The thing is so light, it weighs like this one even, which is like the Cadillac of 2CVs, in terms of, being a later version with very luxury features like ashtrays and such, and it weighs at about 1,300 pounds. Earlier ones were lighter, and that was a big part of this car's ability to move around and do what it had to do. It had this crazy sardine can sunroof, which really wasn't for sun lovers, but was more for being able, that the farmers had to have big cargo that would come out the roof. So, that was the point of that. The windows are flip up. The earlier cars had suicide doors. Later ones like this had normal opening doors. I had a French neighbor at one point, a guy named Jean. He actually suicided. A very tragic story. But I drove a 2CV home a few years ago. Man, I got 10 or 15 now. And, he was so smitten with it and loved it and told me about his childhood and said his friends could basically disassemble his 2CV with the tire iron. And then they brought it all inside his apartment and put it back together or some shit like that. But I guess there is a place in the heart of almost every French person for these things, and I suppose who can blame them. But the styling is very, very simplistic, very unusual, very French, and of course very, very distinctive. It was actually the first car to get Michelin's new radial tires in 1948, so that was a pretty big deal. It was also an early adopter of 4-speed transmissions. Most cars at the time had 3 speeds. This thing, the guy who was tasked with putting the tranny in it, the guy who was tasked with putting the transmission in it said he figured he could get an extra gear in there, with using the same amount of space. And it helped the car because with 4 speeds, they were able to gear it so it could actually get up and move even with its, essentially 9 to 20 horsepower engine. And that was a fairly big deal at the time. You can see the grille in the front with the Citroen chevrons. It's got a ribbed hood. Earlier ones had a different hood. There were a bunch of variants of these things. The first one was a panel van called the Fourgonette, which came out. You see those things running around. There were also bigger vans and pickup trucks and, a bunch of different stuff came out based on this A platform that just sold and sold and sold and eventually just moved to all corners of the earth. In the 70s in France, there were these, they called them raids. It's kind of an unfortunate name. But a bunch of young people would get together in their 2CVs and drive overland to places like Iran or Senegal or Africa, all the way, the incredible journeys on these things across the Sahara Desert that, were very, very popular at the time. So basically the 2CV just became this French icon and way of life that even to some point continues today. There was a throng of special editions, in fact, women bought a bunch of these things. So there were some editions geared just towards women. One was called the Dolly. Probably the most interesting to me was the 007. It came after For Your Eyes Only. They used one of these in that movie. They put a big motor in it so it would be powerful enough to film the scenes. And it was yellow. So they came out with one. It had 007 on the doors and actual bullet hole graphics on the car, which is just absolutely amazing to me. They did not put the big motor in it, though. It still had the smaller one. But anyway, all very fascinating. Here we have big panel van. What the hell is this thing? Cargo vans coming out. Who the hell is that? Who knows? Anyway, it doesn't matter. We'll keep going. So there were some special editions. This was one of them called the Charleston. It came out in the 80s. It was meant to be a one-year-only thing based on early Art Deco styling, but it proved popular enough that they kept building it for a few more years, and Peter ended up with this one. I remember this car. It actually came from a good customer of ours who passed away. Very nice guy. He bought it new in France in the 80s, took it apart, and brought it to America as parts, and then registered it here as a 62 model. He probably bought the VIN plate from an old junker in a French graveyard, which was a very common way for these sort of 80s and 90s, well, I guess 80s more than 90s, because the last one I think was built in some strange country in 90. But you could never have brought an 82 2CV to America unless you rebadged it as an earlier version, and that's the way this car made it here. Probably the most interesting variant to me of the 2CV was called the Sahara, which was a 4-wheel drive, and they did that by putting 2 independent engines and transmissions in the car, one at the front, one at the back. There's one of those in the Collier Museum here in Naples. Has the spare tire on the hood, and the only thing linking the drivetrains are just one big shaft, which, you know, makes the shifting for both motors the same at the driver's position. So it also had two fuel filler necks coming up out the front doors because well, you know, France. I mean, what a strange piece. They made less than 1,000 of those, and they're pretty collectible today. But you can see the styling of the car is just absolutely unique. The strange looking wheels, you know, the fender, the height that it sits at. You can't even begin to appreciate the amount of travel the suspension has until you drive it. I mean, you take a corner and it's like, you know, cornering a yacht. The whole thing just absolutely tilts over. But you would have a very hard time rolling one of these cars based on that. But even all the way into the 80s and, you know, close to the 90s, they stayed true to the utilitarian roots and kept the car very, very, very simple. So anyway, look, let's just get into this thing. This one is late enough to have what they dubbed basically as a hatchback. Oh God, let's get this up here. And look at this thing. Look at the way this works. So that goes up here, clips in there. Oh boy. Okay, so there it is. You can see the simplicity of the seats. You can see the spare tire in there. The guy who originally owned this car had a fantastic license plate called Escargot. Absolutely love it. And there it is. So you've got tons of room in the back for whatever it is you need to put in there. Little French kids are going to be chipper. They can sit on the spare tire and be very, very happy. You also have this little thing which clips in, which is a nice spot to put like a Remington 870 shotgun or something, whatever you need. I don't know if you can have one in France, but you can certainly have one here. These taillights are, of course, big and comprehensive, as are the bumpers, and that denotes this being a later model version. Let's have a look under the hood. I like the way it locks there. I guess France was dealing with crime at the time. Let's get this rather light hood up and this enormous prop rod, which I can't see where it goes. I just put it there for the moment, although that's not right. But anyway, here you go. So here is a Boxer two-cylinder air-cooled motor, basically running ahead of the front axle. This one does have drive belts, it would appear, but the earlier versions had a one-piece crank and a dynamo that had no drive belt at all, and a fan built into the drive shaft. Just absolute simplicity. This one, you end up having a drive belt, so you can tell it's a very advanced unit. This is 602 cc's, which was the biggest they put in these cars, and it could actually run up at 70 miles an hour. So I wouldn't exactly call it a highway car, but you know, it's more peppy than most. These headlights are hinged, so you can aim them accordingly with depending on how your cargo is loaded and whether you're going up a hill or not. And very, very simplistic. You can see the shift linkage, and you know, I leaned on this thing, it starts breaking. This screwed me over one time. You see this little cotter pin here. Well, I was driving one of these cars, you know, 10, 15 years ago. That cotter pin came out. The shifter actually ended up removing, and I ended up holding the shifter, this loose thing in my hand, completely disconnected from the drivetrain of the car. Had to pull over and, you know, put another cotter pin in it. But, I mean, if you think the Beetle is simple, this thing has it beat by droves. I mean, it is just the easiest, most non-complicated car to maintain, even despite its bizarre French weirdness. So very, very interesting shit. So I tell you what, I'm going to pause there for a minute, get the hood back down, get the back down. We'll go around the outside real quick, and then we'll take it for a drive. So bear with me one moment. All right, so let's do this. Again, you see the simplicity of the design. You know, I do like the way that Charleston runs that burgundy scheme and kind of a circle around the doors. I think it looks cool. You know, having a locking doors was a new, it didn't come originally with those. The windows that just flip up, you know, try going through a drive-through with that. The sardine can roof. The original cars didn't have a glass back window, and the roller top rolled down almost all the way to the bumper, exposing the trunk area. It's just an absolutely unique piece. You can see it as a tiny little tailpipe there, reminiscent of the generator pipe on my old shitty motorhome, and the bumpers with the tape strip on them, the wheels with the lug wrench fits that little poverty cap in the center to expose probably what's 3 lug bolts. I haven't looked, but I'm sure. You got reflectors on the side. You got these little opera windows, and they're not opera windows, but you know, nice visibility out it actually. Your French Canadians in the back, you know, they'll be chipper enough. You got room for 3 of them. You got decent leg room. This one is almost again like a Cadillac. It's got these diamond tuck seats with loads of cushion and whatnot. Remember, the original ones had nothing but hammocks hanging from the ceilings. You've got these sort of cheesy, cheap, you know, simplistic door cards covering whatever mechanism. You know, you don't have any kind of serious door pulls, just this little lock thing there. I actually don't see a door pull of any kind in the back. I don't know how the hell you open the door, because this seems like a lock to me, so maybe when you get in the back you're just stuck. I'm not sure. I actually tried. Let's try that. How the hell? I'm going to be stuck in here. We're going to have to pause. How the hell do you get out of this car? Yeah, I can't. Oh, come on. There's got to be a way. No, you're in the back of this car. You're stuck. Nothing. Yeah, I can't get out. I don't know how the hell to get out of this thing. Yeah, alright, great. Well, I'm going to have to pause it for a minute and figure that out. Nothing in the back there. What a fantastic way to trap someone inside a car. Alright, well, bear with me. Yeah, so unless someone tells me differently, I actually had to stand up. Oh, wait, there it was. God damn it, I missed it. Okay, so there's the door handle. Wish I'd found that earlier. And there's Peter's frightening cat. Anyway, let's have a look up here. So you've got split seats. I'm not sure. They do seem to roll forward, so you can probably go forward and back. That's the height of luxury. You've got a 1-spoke steering wheel because, you know, France. You've got more of the simplistic door cards there. You've got your VIN number stamped into the side. I mean, this thing is just hilarious. And again, this is like the Sedan DeVille version of these cars. So let's get it in neutral. Gonna do that with this. Yeah, seem to be in neutral. Let's see if we can fire it up. Yeah, runs like a top. We have really fantastic gauges here. We've got 120 kilometer per hour speedometer. You've got a fuel gauge, which shows it has pretty much no fuel in it. We've got 14,000 kilometers on the car. It gives you the shift pattern beneath that. Gives you a voltmeter, which is reading a little bit low, but seems to be going up. Not sure what this addendum switch is for, but, you know, there it is. This turn signal stalk works fine and is only a turn signal stalk. Over here, this twists forward. I don't know what the hell that does. V and R. Should have looked that up earlier, and I think it's also the horn. It is. We've got red and blue, which is, I guess, cold air, hot air. This is what I was talking about. Penelope has struck again. So I don't have the first shipment yet, but we've got Curious Cars hats. And like the flasks, we're going to do a giveaway on those in the near future. Here's washers. Here's, I found this out earlier. This little thing here is some sort of wiper wash. I pushed it thinking it was the choke, even though the choke is all lit up down there. And I'm not going to do it now. Oh, what the hell. So you push it, yeah, and it squirts your washer fluid out. So it doesn't have any, I don't know if that's vacuum operated or, oh God, and I've pushed something in over on the side here. I don't know what that does. Yeah, whatever. It's all, you know, French controls, and God knows what that's going to do for us. So you can also see I have the vent open under the windshield, which just gives you direct access to the outside air. So, all right, let me see if I can get this thing going. I think you go over to the left and back is first gear. It is. All right, here we go. And I tell you what, man, driving this car, you are an instant spectacle on the roads. Forward and up, that should be second. It is. And straight right back is third. Nice. Let's get our wipers going. How the hell do we do that? There we are. And then up and over should be fourth. Look at that. All right, so now we can hit our 71 miles an hour. And I gotta say, the car doesn't drive that bad, man. I mean, it, you know, again, it weighs 1,300 pounds, which is absolutely nothing. I mean, if we're hit by a truck, it's not even going to collapse. It's just going to push the car off like a beach ball and, you know, probably keep you safe. Oh my God, what do we got? There's a rat or something running into the road. I haven't seen rats around here before, but that's fantastic. You got big secondary noises there. I'm sure it's a 4-barrel. And you know, there it is. So, I mean, I got the top open to the world, so I got plenty of air coming in. I've got my side windows open. So, you know, the temperature isn't that terrible right now with all the wind flow. And it's actually a pretty fun car to drive. I think that has something to do with it being the 602cc model and not the really, really tiny one that had no pep at all. And even the brakes, again, I mean, what does it have to stop? Next to nothing. You could be next to a cop, race him, and he'd have absolutely no idea. But from what I understand, the machining on these engines was pretty impressive at the time. I believe we could turn over 6,000 RPM. Which was pretty unheard of back then, you know, in terms of the quality of the materials. So even for a French car, it was pretty good engineering. Maybe even better than the German Beetle that it competed with. So look, anyway, there it is. This is a 1982 Citroen 2CV Charleston. This is from a private collection. This is Peter's car, not for sale. I'm not going to bother driving it on the highway because that would just be insane. And I'm not going to expound too much farther, oh boy, than what I already have. So I hope to have a couple more cars coming up before I take off next Friday. I'll be gone for a little over a week. I'm hitting an auction in Savannah, and then we'll jump right back into it in the new setup, get back into the motorhome. I'll come out with a video of the user, the people who sent stuff in, the Ask Me Anything stuff, the reader rides thing, whatever you want to call it. We'll get all that done, and then we'll go on from there. So again, bear with me. We're not the most organized channel out there, but we're going to work on it and get it done. I just hope I don't get bashed on the drive. So thank you for having a look. Really, really appreciate it. And we will see you with the next one. Take care.